So welcome everyone. We had a beautiful conversation a couple of days with Tumu Nalealoha. She's the queen of Hawaii, and she's not the queen because she lives in a big castle. She's the queen because she holds the stories and the traditions and the language and the dances for the Hawaiian culture. And it was really beautiful to talk to her. She's going to be doing a song in a couple of weeks, just to hear what she was saying, how a lot of these old stories are more important now, today. And, you know, just to, as far as old stories, the Bhagavad Gita is definitely up there, you know. Broderick is going to get into it with us today. And just speaking to the synergy theme, and I want to share my screen with you guys. With what we're doing is, you know, our focus is the circle. The creation of the whole greater than the sum of the parts. So I want to welcome Broderick to the circle. And for a moment, let's take a pause. Let's straighten our spine and find a calm breath and just ground ourselves. You can close your eyes if you want. Take a calm inhale and find a lot of length in your spine and smile into your eyes. Nice inhale breath, long spine, nice exhale, and smile into the eyes. A little stillness and bring to the mind, you know, just what the circle means to you, what synergy means to you. Collaboration, communication. A lot of gratitude for being here with you guys today, and Broderick, for you taking the time to join us. Salim.
Fantastic. So good to be here again. I really value these Sunday gatherings. I just came from a really wonderful another gathering separate from Synergy, and really wonderful just to have this community and these communities coming together. This week, I'm really excited to introduce and present a very close friend of mine. When I was living in Oakland, California, we spent a lot of time together. We'd speak about yoga, we'd speak about life, we'd speak about capoeira Angola, both of which we're practitioners of both of these practices and art forms. A very soulful brother, a very intentional brother, very rooted, in my experience, very rooted in his practice, which he'll, I'm sure, speak more about, and someone I care a lot about. So I'm really excited to introduce Broderick Rodell. And I'll just say a few words. This is from his bio. I'm always, one thing I love about the Sangha is actually reading people's bios. It's like, you know, folks on a personal level, but then even my dad, you know, it was like a month ago, I read like his bio and some of the history, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that, you know, Dad. And so likewise with Broderick, some of this I did know, but it's been really a while since I visited some of the information. So I'll just share with you a few words about Broderick from his bio. If you repeat any of this, Brod, that's fine. So Broderick's search for self-betterment led him to understand that a way to a better reality is through personal development and human kindness. He's a dedicated student and practitioner of yoga, which includes contemplation and meditation, breath work, and mindful movement. His yoga classes, workshops, and trainings and retreats incorporate knowledge gathered from the Western sciences of psychology, physiology, and anatomy to complement the rich yogic science from India. He also has a PhD in chemical engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and a doctorate of naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University. I'm really excited to offer this Sunday Sangha, which is on the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, to you all. And so I hand it over to my brother, my friend, Broderick.
right, Salim, Francisco, everyone, thank you for allowing me to come into the space to share what little I know about the Bhagavad Gita. I'm kind of humbled by it. I'm not a scholar of it. I guess I'm a beginning scholar of it. It's a lot to try to unpack. There's a lot in this text. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how do I present this? I think what I want to do today is kind of introduce you to the Bhagavad Gita, give you a little context of where it comes from. And hopefully I'm just going to invite dialogue as a result of this presentation. There's a lot to it, and I hope I do it some justice. Please feel free to ask any questions. I think maybe there will be moments where I leave space for questions, but we may save them till the end. But if you have a question or anything like that, you can put it into a chat box. And from the chat box, maybe Salim or Francisco can keep tabs on that. I'm not that technology savvy, but yeah. So I'm going to share a screen, and it'll be a PowerPoint presentation because I'm not, again, I'm not at the place where I can just speak it all off my mind, right? Not quite yet. So I'm going to share the screen. So whoever, Salim or Francisco, can you allow me to share the screen?
Fran, I think you'll have to put him as a co-host.
Okay.
Done. You're
right.
on. Good.
All right, there we go. Thanks. All right. Can you all see that?
Perfect.
All right, let me move these images to the side. I told you I'm not technology savvy, but hopefully that'll work.
It looks great.
All right, awesome. All right, well, let's dig into it. The Bhagavad Gita, it's the song of the Lord. Gita is song, Bhagavan is Lord, and name for God, or the Supreme Being, and which I'll dig into a little bit later on what we mean by that. Krishna here is right here on the right, and here's Arjuna, and I'll unpack these two characters as we go through. The very heart of this text is a conversation, a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, and I will again share with you what that means in just a moment. Okay. All right. All right, so it's an epic poem. It has about 700 Sanskrit verses and 18 chapters, but it's located within the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is like probably the longest epic text in the world. I mean, you can imagine, I can't remember how many, but you can take the Iliad or the Odyssey, maybe it's like 10 times as long as the Iliad. So it's a massive piece of work. And it's 18 books itself, so 100,000 verses. So it's massive. And there's lots of other teachings within the Mahabharata, but the Bhagavad Gita really stands out as its own text. Most people read the Bhagavad Gita and never ever heard of the Mahabharata, which is very interesting, because the Gita, with its special place that it plays within the Hindu religious context, or even within the world of yoga, and a Brahminical culture, it plays a significant role. So you can bypass the Mahabharata and read the Bhagavad Gita. But I do suggest the Mahabharata is a very interesting story, very fascinating, very complex. It's super long, but you can get a condensed version of it, which is about, you get about 1,000-page version of it that's narrated and really shortened, but it's really fascinating to read. Sometimes the Gita is considered the Gita Upanishad, the fifth Veda. And so in a Brahminical culture, you have the 4 Vedas, And the Gita is sometimes considered the fifth Veda. So you have the Rig Veda, it's the first one, Arthava Veda, Yajur Veda, and the Sama Veda. And then you have the Upanishads, which is kind of the wisdom, the end of the Vedas, they say, the foundational philosophical knowledge from the Vedic corpus of books or texts, ritualistic texts, which I won't get into. But the Upanishads is a really special set of literature in Hindu culture, but really the Vedas and the Brahminical lineage of Hinduism, which is the foundation of Hinduism, which is a little bit different than the old Vedic culture. And so the Hinduism is on top of the old Vedic culture. But the Gita, even though it was written a little bit later than the Upanishads, maybe some of the latter Upanishads, it's such a profound text and special text that some consider it a Upanishad in itself. And the reason why is that the Vedas were considered Shruti, or heard, or revealed knowledge. So these folks who channeled, these rishis, seers, who channeled this, the sages, I don't know the word for this, who channeled this literature, I mean, they didn't write it themselves, but they were in a trance-like state, and this information, this knowledge was passed through them. And so the Gita holds that level of potency within the lineage of the Vedas or Hinduism. These are complicated terms, the idea of Hinduism, and I'm trying to tread waters carefully here by using these terms. All right, so it's a story of a familiar battle for kingship between two sets of cousins. So I'll give a little foundational history of this. This is important. So you have the Pandavas, and these are the 5 sons of Pandu. I won't give all the names. Arjuna is one of them. And you have the Kauravas, the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra. So Pandu and Dhritarashtra are brothers. Their father, the king, now this is a very shortened version of the Mahabharata. Their father, the king, died. Dhritarashtra is the oldest son. And the throne usually goes to the oldest son, but Dhritarashtra was blind. And so Pandu was given the reins to the kingdom because he wasn't blind, even though he was the youngest son. But Pandu ended up dying for various reasons I won't get into. And therefore, his sons were too young to take over the kingdom. And Dhritarashtra took over the kingdom, he and his sons. But they didn't want to give up power. Eventually, his sons, particularly his oldest son, Duryodhana, I don't have that written there, but he didn't want to give up the throne. He wanted to maintain power, and the rightful rulers should be the Pandavas, and so there's a civil war that's about to take place as a result. And the Kauravas, they played a trick on the Pandavas because one of the older sons, Yudhishthira, he's the oldest son, he's really the leader. He had a gambling habit, and he lost the gambling match, a dice match actually, lost the dice match. In some stories, some version of the story, this happened twice. Man, the dude gave up everything, gave up his family, even the wife. They all shared one wife, but I won't go into that, why that happened. But he gave it up everything. And so they got exiled into the forest for 13 years. And then when they came out to reclaim the kingdom, the Kauravas was like, nope, you can't have it. And therefore, a battle is about to commence. Well, the battle ends up happening, but the story of the Gita is right before the battle starts. So the historical context. So when was it written? Now, this is important. So old Bardic tradition, which with many layers and stages. So the Bardic tradition is poets. So it's orally transmitted. It wasn't written down. It's a story that was told through poetry. It's like the griots within the African tradition. In most traditions, most of these things are actually stories told from generation to generations, and there were folks who were caretakers of the stories and pass the stories along. But at some point, it was written down. Now, when was it written down? Now, based on the academy and current research and looking at texts and actually doing dating, carbon dating and things of that nature, somewhere between 200 BCE, before the current era, to 100 CE, so after Christ. But traditionally, they're suggesting that this thing was written in 3100 BCE, or before the current era. I won't get into the discrepancy here, but a lot of it is related to the fact that it's Shruti, or heard text. So there's a lot of, in a religious traditional perspective, the dating can get a little tricky. I'll just put it that way. So it's a synthetic work that draws together wide ranges of ideas and practices. So you have to take this into consideration when you think about the Gita. So when I'm talking about the Brahminical lineage of culture, that's the Vedas. And those Vedic texts was written probably 700-800 BCE, before the current era, somewhere maybe 1,000, I can give it that much. And the Upanishads start coming on board, like the wisdom, the core wisdom of the Vedas, around 500, the early Vedas, 600-700 BCE, down all the way to the current era, the later Upanishads. But things were changing, things were being shaken up. In the Vedic culture, the Brahmins, the priests, pretty much dominated, and it was primarily done. Rituals were pretty much the way that the society was, sustained. And so you would do these yagyas, fire ceremonies, and these fire ceremonies were done to maintain harmony with the universe, with the celestial gods, so that there's harmony between man, or humans, and the deities, the various deities. Then there's food, there's everyone is taken care of as a result of that. But the Upanishads was like, okay, this is getting a little bit too much. The rituals, it was adding a drain to the society. There's a lot of slaughter of animals because of the sacrifices that were made. And it's like, we got to get to the heart of this. And that's where the Upanishads come into play. Sankhya is a philosophy we don't know exactly what its original date is. Again, it was something that was oral. But Sankhya is an old philosophical tradition in India. Yoga, and what yoga means and what we think of yoga today is very different than what it was back then. This was primarily done with the ascetics. And Buddhism and Jainism has a major influence on what yoga is. And so yoga was done by wandering ascetics, so wandering monks, people outside of the mainstream of the Vedic or the Brahminical culture and society. So that's where the heart of yoga begins. And Buddhism and Jainism, along with some of the yogis of that time, were considered the Shramana movement. And the Shramana movement, these folks who were outside, again, ascetics, outside of the mainstream Brahminical culture, were trying to find liberation, freedom from the cycle of rebirth and death. How do we find freedom? Liberation from suffering. And so a lot of this was taking place, Buddhism around 500, 400 BCE, Jainism as well around that same time. So they were questioning a lot of the Vedic ideas and challenging a lot of the Vedic ideas. So within this milieu of philosophical, intellectual discussion and ideas around the nature of human suffering and what is the purpose of living, through the Bhagavad Gita was written. Now, the Bhagavad Gita is a Vaishnava text. In Hinduism, there's three main sects or three main traditional lines. There's lots of them, but there's three main traditional lines. You have the Vaishnavas, which is Vishnu, those who are followers of Vishnu. You have, and Vishnu has various incarnations, avatars. Not avatar, but avatara means incarnations. And Krishna is one of those incarnations. Rama is one of those incarnations. And then you have the Shiva and the Shaivas, and the Shaivas is the lineage of Shiva, and there's various names for Shiva as well. And then you have the Shakta tradition, the goddess tradition. These are the main three branches of Hinduism, which is more of a devotional practice, which is a little bit different than the Vedic ritualistic tradition. And so when exactly in history did this start to unfold? Don't know exactly, but the Gita is one of those primary texts of Hinduism, which is again very different than the Vedic tradition, even though the Vedic tradition is foundational to Hinduism, it's slightly different. And I won't go into all the details of that, but to recognize that this is a Vaishnava text, Krishna is a central character in this text, and there's a devotion to Krishna that is central to the Bhagavad Gita. So literary context. So what is it? Is it theology? So putting forth a unique vision of an inclusive yet all-encompassing divinity. So this is important because most people in the Vedic tradition was the Brahmins were the dominating. So within the Vedic and the Brahminical tradition, there's four. I guess I should go ahead and introduce that now. You had the Varna system or the caste system. In the caste system, you had the priests who pretty much dominated. The priest and the warrior caste, or the Kshatriyas. And so the warrior caste, they were the warriors, the kings, the people who pretty much managed the society. And then you had the next caste, which is the merchants. I can't remember the name right now. And then the caste below that, pretty much slaves and people who were did all the cleaning and I can't think of the right word right now, but maintaining the society in that way. So in the Vedic or Brahmanical lineage, the Brahmins were dominated. They dominated the entire culture. And also the other three, the top three, the Kshatriyas, as well as the, can't remember the name, but the merchant class as well, they were called twice born. And so they were well taken care of and well supported. And they were included within, even though the Brahmins were primarily ran all of the rituals, but the next two castes were considered a mainstay part of the society and the culture. At any rate, around the time of the Bhagavad Gita, it became much more inclusive. So you can't just have one particular group of people who are dominating the religious, spiritual context of the society. And you'll see in a moment why that is important and why bhakti and devotion is so central to the Bhagavad Gita and Hinduism in general. Scripture again, Shruti, timeless and independent scripture, a revelation and song of God in the form of Krishna. So I'll leave it at that for now. Philosophy, and there's definitely a lot of philosophical goodies in this text. An inquiry that seeks to determine what is righteous and good, investigating the meaning and purpose of human life. So it really explores human conduct, karma. Karma is action, how we act, how we behave in the world, and one's moral and social duty, dharma, within the cosmic order. And I'll unpack dharma in just a moment. Really, really important term. The whole text basically centers around dharma and adharma. And I'll explain that in just a moment. All right, more to the literary context. To the right, this image here, this book, this version of the Bhagavad Gita, translation of the Bhagavad Gita, is really, really well done. Graham Schwag. It's a newer translation. So you gotta remember, this thing is written, up to 2,500 years ago, depending on how you date it. And so there's been lots of commentary by different sects, different traditions all over India, actually all over the world. The Gita has had a significant influence on human thought, actually, beyond India. But this one is very poetic, and it's really nicely written, the way he's written this book. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today comes from this particular translation. And there are other translations that I like as well, but this one is really, I think it's a good introductory one that's actually adheres pretty well to the Sanskrit. A lot of other versions of the Bhagavad Gita are kind of compilations of various English versions of summaries of it. But this one, you can actually, each verse is written out, but it's really well done poetically. So it's a beautiful one. But the majority of this verse is focused on three concepts based on what Graham is saying in his translation. A philosophical vision of the human self and the nature of the precarious outer world. And you'll see about that in just a moment. The various paths and practices that lead the self to the inner world of transcendence and personal presence of the divine. So it's all about, this text is all about how do you overcome your inner struggle? How do you transcend suffering? Using yoga, essentially. The whole text is about yoga at its core. Then the innermost world of the heart, where divinity is encountered directly in a dialogue between the soul and God, or the supreme being. And we could talk about God in just a moment, what that means, particularly what that means in the Hindu context. And it's very different than our Abrahamic version of concept of God. Very, very different. People think that in India that it's polytheistic, but no, it's actually monotheistic. And so God can be expressed in different ways. And so this Ishvara is the name of the supreme being, given to that supreme being. But each person, each sect, each part of the society has God, the supreme being, manifests itself to different people in different ways. And that's why you get the different gods, or different names of the God. But it's one supreme being that all of these names are pointing to. And in this particular text, since it's a Vaishnava text, Krishna is the supreme being here. And Arjuna is a warrior. He's one of the Pandavas. He's one of the greatest fighter in the world. He's an archer, but he's the greatest one in the world. And he represents our individual soul. So there's different ways of talking about the Gita. Some people look at it as allegory. Some people look at it again as theology. Some people just look at it as a philosophical text. So depends on the reader and what you're trying to get out of the text. There's a lot of wisdom, a lot that can be gotten from this text, regardless of it being primarily a text within the Vaishnava tradition. So you don't have to be a Krishna Bhakti yogi in order to gain the wisdom out of the Bhagavad Gita. Let me see. I'll pause for a moment and see if there are any questions. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you how you read it, how your approach with it is.
That's a complicated question. So I'm really into philosophy. I won't consider myself, I'm definitely not a Krishna Bhakta, a devotee of Krishna. And so I look at it as allegory within my lineage. The various characters within the story are different aspects of ourselves. Arjuna representing the soul, the self. Krishna representing our higher self. Brahman, or the Atman. So our individual soul considered the Atman, and Brahman is the ultimate reality. And we can make connection with the ultimate reality. We are an expression of that ultimate reality. That's our higher self. Our lower selves are ideas about ourselves, our ego, in a sense. Not really ego. Ego is not the appropriate term. It's a better term they use in the yoga philosophy, ahamkar, the I maker. But The way I look at this, it can be looked at as an internal dialogue, and it's just, you can still extract all the various wisdom out of it. But there's something important to say about bhakti and devotion. And one can be devoted to one's higher self, one's higher ideal. So gods all over the world are an expression of human intellectual ingenuity. And so, you know, any concept of God, even within the Abrahamic lineage and tradition, God is a concept. You know, who has authorship or ownership over what God is? And God is different in different worlds and different societies and different cultures. And so, you know, it's an ideal that we have about something that transcends our ordinary understanding of reality. And yoga, the beautiful thing about yoga is like you have to find your own experience, no matter what your concepts are. At some point, you got to transcend your concepts, because concepts, a lot of the craziness that's happening in the world is a result of people fighting over different ideas. And we are attached. We cling to our ideas and lose sight on the beauty of what it means to be a human being, or the beauty of life and spirituality in general. And we'll see that in just a moment. One of the yogas that comes up in this text, in karma yoga and renunciation and all that stuff, we'll see in just a moment. That's a good question. There's so much stuff here, and I'm stumbling over my words because I'm like, how much should I say? I don't want to go into too much detail, and also it's so much detail in my mind that I can't even bring it all out. So this is good practice for me to try to speak to this text very concisely and all of the history that goes into it. So I'm trying to do my best, but
Perfect, brother. Appreciate it.
I have to refer to my notes. I have tons of notes everywhere. All right. So that kind of gives you a literary context and a historical context, a very brief exploration of that. And the history of yoga is very complex, sophisticated, and a lot of the research and scholarship now in the world of yoga is really awesome what's happening, which is good. Separating myth and dogma from what's actually, you know, what is historically true to yoga and where it comes from. Wandering ascetics, essentially. All right, the narrative frame. So let's get to the heart of it. Pretty much the entire Gita is centered around essentially a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. So before I do that, though, Sanjaya is a minister, an assistant to King Dhritarashtra. So Dhritarashtra is in the kingdom. This is the blind king, and his servant or minister, his assistant, tells him the story as he saw. He's been given a divine vision to see this dialogue between Krishna, not only to see it, but everything about the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. Sanjaya was able to peek into what was being said throughout the conversation and dialogue, because he was given by Vyasa, the narrator of all of this, the one who's written or told the story of the Mahabharata. Sanjaya was given, Vyasa is a sage, but Sanjaya was given the divine vision in order to see this narrative unfold. Now the story is told after the war has taken place. So Sanjaya was there at the edge of the battlefield. Even though people on both sides, the two armies on both sides, they couldn't hear the dialogue, but Sanjaya was, because he was given this divine vision. But after the war was over, he went back and he told the whole story of the Gita to Dhritarashtra. That's a very hard word to say. So it's a dialogue between the warrior. He's a Kshatriya. Kshatriya is one of the Varnas, or the members of the caste system, and his charioteer, Krishna, which he didn't know in the beginning, turns out to be the supreme being. I'm just going to use the word God here for now. So it's a dialogue between those two, the warrior and charioteer. And as you would see throughout the narrative, student and teacher. and devotee in God as the story unfolds. In the middle of the battlefield, so when the battle was about to get started, in the first chapter of the Gita, people are blowing horns, they're blowing their conchs and beating on kettle drums, the war cry, they're about to get it on. And then at some point, Krishna, Arjuna said, Krishna, take me to the middle of the battlefield. I want to see both sides. I want to see what's happening. So they go, Krishna takes them to the middle of the battlefield. It's far enough away to where the two sides, they can't hear what's happening in their conversation, that dialogue. But Arjuna starts to look around, and on the opposite side, remember, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, they grew up together. It's a family. They all grew up together as kids. They have the same teachers, gurus, the people who taught them how to fight, religious rites. They have all the same family. So when he gets to the middle, he sees this and he's like, I can't do this. He has a meltdown. I can't kill my own family members, my own teachers. And so happens that he's like the godfather. Bhishma is like one of the central characters in the Mahabharata within this lineage, the family of the Bharatas. And he's like, he's like the grandchild. We can't go to war and fight against these people. These are our family. I'd rather die than to engage in this war. What good is going to come of me fighting in this war? We should just quit. And he has a meltdown. He throws down his bow and pretty much goes into tears. Seriously, a total meltdown, breakdown. And Krishna, pretty much, the dialogue proceeds of Krishna trying to convince Arjuna that he should fulfill his duty, his dharma, and fight. And so all of the teachings of the Gita is centered around Krishna encouraging Arjuna to do his duty and to fight. And so what is this battle? It's the tale of Dharma and versus adharma. Pandavas represents Dharma, or good. Kauravas represent adharma, evil. So what is Dharma? Dharma is central to this. The whole battlefield is the field of Dharma. Dharma in Khmer is, again, you can go in a dictionary and it's like tons of words that represent what Dharma means. It can be looked at in terms of one's own duty, social and moral obligation, virtue, righteousness, religion, law, justice, order. What does that mean for us individually? So you have Swadharma, one's personal Dharma. My personal Dharma is, one can say, purpose. Purpose is not necessarily the right word, but you can say divine purpose. Like, what am I here for? What is my vocation? And being able to find what that is. We all have something that we're here to do. We all have our gifts and our talents, and how we can best serve the world with what we have, or what we came to this earth with. And that's our personal Dharma. But that's also, no matter wherever you are in your society, when you go to work, that's your Dharma. It's your duty to go to work and fulfill your job as an engineer, if that's what you're doing. Some people are artists, musicians. That's their Dharma. They're willing to make all of the sacrifices in order to. They may have to give up a lot to be a musician, to be a successful musician, but that's their Dharma. That's what they feel drawn to do. How do you find that? You got to look deep inside of yourself and tap into something and say, this feels right. Then that's your personal Dharma. By fulfilling your Dharma, you're maintaining harmony in the universe. When we go against our Dharma, when we go against our own true nature, we can cause friction in the universe, unnecessary friction in the universe, and ultimately suffering in our lives. Kula Dharma is your family Dharma, your duty to your family, taking care of your family. Jati Dharma is your birth or caste Dharma. Again, I won't get into a whole discussion about the caste system and where it came from and how good or bad it is. I mean, caste system is totally being transformed in India. Every society has had a caste system of some sort. It's a very modern thing for caste systems are to be challenged. I mean, they're not over. I mean, here in the United States, you know, there's a caste system of some sort, different socioeconomic levels and things of that nature. So that's a whole nother discussion in and of itself to go into Jati Dharma. But the whole text centers around this, one doing their Dharma, and this outer conflict, all the stuff that's going on in the world that's represented by these two wars, this burgeoning civil war. That's the outer conflict. And then Arjuna is who can be a representative of us. We can see ourselves through Arjuna. He's having a breakdown because of what's going on in the outer world. He's having an inner breakdown. And as you can see, a lot of that's what's happening here in the United States. There's a lot of internal conflict going on based on the external conflict of our environment and what's going on out in the world. How do we overcome that? This is what the Gita's wisdom is all about. How do we overcome the inner struggle in order for us to do our best in the outer world to make the world a better world? So yoga in the Gita. So the text essentially is about yoga. 20% of the verses has yoga written in it. So the text is a study or an expression of yoga itself. So the universal message promotes a social ethic of engaging the world through disciplined yoga practice. This is important. So prior to the Gita, well, in textual form, most of the yogis in the world, they were the wandering ascetics. I mean, and at this time too, a lot of those ascetics, prior to the Buddha in particular, I mean, they're pretty much torturing themselves, bodily mortification, to try to transcend the body. The body is the house of suffering. So I want to transcend the body, and I'm going to do all of these crazy ascetical practices, tapas, these austerities, to transcend the suffering of being in this body. And most of the people, and after that, people will start to establish, monasteries and things of that nature. So there's only a select few people in the society. And within the Brahminical society or culture, it was the Brahmins who, again, had easy access to the practices that later became a part of the yogic system. So the Gita said, no, this is for everyone. It's not just for a select few members of society. While classical yoga, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, what people tend to quote, that whole text is geared towards ascetics or semi-ascetics, people who are leaving the world and focusing on yoga practice, which is an intense form of practice. Even though in most of the yoga schools, you know, we go to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, no one is really practicing Patanjalian yoga. And to practice Patanjalian yoga, it can be very, very difficult. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't get any insight from it. Just like in this text, you can gain insight from it, learn from it, and take on the various practices that the text offers to support the overall outcome that one may want. But the Gita, the yoga in the Gita, is not just the classical yoga of Patanjali. The classical yoga of Patanjali, think monk, think ascetic or a wandering monk, and a person who goes out to the forest, goes outside of society, renounces society, and focuses on meditation and the cultivation of the qualities of mind that are conducive for a meditative experience, ending in samadhi or trance. And in that trance-like state, ecstasy, one has transcended suffering. We can talk about this later. You can ask me questions about what I mean by all that in a moment. So what is yoga? How is yoga defined? Now, yoga, you can look in a dictionary, yoga to yoke, unite, union. But what does it mean in the context of the practice? Again, you can look in a Sanskrit dictionary and look up yoga, and then there's just tons of different meanings for yoga. The yoga that's mentioned in the Vedas, particularly the Rig Veda, is not the yoga that people are talking about later on. It basically meant the yoke and the thing that was used to keep the animals together, or yoking the animals to the carriage. That yoga was used in that particular context in the early, particularly the Rig Veda, the early Vedas. But much later on, this concept of yoga continuously transformed to get how it's being defined today. The means, the practice, the discipline, the path to liberation from suffering is what you can think of as yoga. So yoga as means is to liberate oneself from the cycle of rebirth. So within this cultural context, the soul, that presence that we have inside of us, after we die, it transitions over to another life, and it keeps going over and over and over and over again. But we can, this is called samsara, we can overcome samsara through the practice of yoga, through discipline, through cultivating a way of being. That's liberation from suffering, because suffering is the fact that we continue to being born into this world. In this world, as the Buddha mentioned, there is suffering, there is dissatisfaction, there is discomfort. And we can transcend that by engaging in certain practices. So that's what yoga is. How do we transcend suffering through action? And yoga, at the center of yoga is discipline. You cannot have yoga without discipline. And then another definition of yoga is the goal, the state. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the goal, the state is samadhi. Simple translation of that is trance. And what I mean by trance is if you're meditating on an object, you and the object become one. You forget, you're not thinking about yourself. It's like a deep, profound flow state. And so you get into this flow state, you're totally liberated and free from the world. So some people refer to it like a catatonic state. But it doesn't have to be a catatonic state. You can get into a flow state without it being, you're just kind of checked out. But the highest samadhi one considers is this state where, and you pretty much inhabit that state, where the outside world, you're not, what I'm looking for, you're not confined to the outside world. You're not restricted by the outside world. So that's yoga. Yoga as means, yoga as the goal. And the means is to liberate one from suffering. And suffering is a result of the cycle of rebirth. The definitions of yoga in the Gita, 248, sameness in success and failure is said to be yoga. So equanimity, essentially, evenness of mind. And what comes with that is calmness, peacefulness. No matter what is arising in your life, success, failure, happiness, sadness, whatever emotions that are arising, I can be even-minded. I have equanimity. I don't let the passions grab me and take me. So that's one definition of yoga. Another definition of yoga is skillfulness in action. How do we act in the world? Now, it doesn't mean like if you are a guitarist, like, oh, I'm a really, really good guitarist, so I'm very skilled at playing the guitar. That's not necessarily yoga. That's not what it's talking about. You can be an evil person and be a great guitarist. This is me skillfulness in how we show up in the world. Every moment of our experience, there's some action that's happening. In our bodies right now, there's all types of cellular metabolism, cellular reactions, things that are happening in our bodies to maintain our being, even when we're sitting still. So action is always happening. But skillfulness in action is associated with being essentially a good person, being a virtuous person. You'll see that comes out into this in this text in a moment. And another definition that a lot of people don't put, they usually include 248 and 250, chapter 2, verse 48 and chapter 2, verse 50. But chapter 6, verse 2, I think is important too. I mean, it says that yoga is renunciation. And what do we mean by renunciation? Renouncing the fruits of action and selfish motives. So when you're acting in the world, you're not clinging to the results. You're okay with whatever arises through your actions. And you're not doing it for selfish motives. I'm doing this so I can glorify myself. Say if I'm a musician. So I like playing music and singing, and like sharing it every once in a while, but it's usually my own personal thing. Am I doing it so I can be a superstar, or am I doing it so I can share, be a channel, be a vehicle for music to express its divine self in the world through me? That's yoga. Versus like, no, I'm going to be a superstar Broderick. No, like versus like, no, Broderick is a vehicle for music to express his glorious beauty in the world, to have an impact on the world, to express, for me, I like the word love in the world through music. But even when I do that, I need to still renounce the fruits of my actions as well. I can't be like, okay, then when I go to play this music, I want everyone to celebrate me. I want everyone to throw their arms out at me. I can't find my words this morning, but just put everything out in the world for me. Everyone take care of me because I'm so special. That's not yoga. And if you think about it, that's a place of suffering, because that's not going to always happen. You're going to always be dissatisfied with the results. It's of some sort. You may have moments of pleasure, but there are going to be moments of sadness. There's going to be times when things don't happen the way that we want it to happen. When things don't happen the way that we want it to happen, do we fall apart? Or can I be at ease with what it has happened? Okay, things didn't happen the way I thought it was going to happen, but can I be okay with it? Doesn't mean that you don't strive to continue to fight for what it is that you want in life. It's just that when you're not attached to the fruits, attached to what you think it should be, then you won't suffer as much, or you won't suffer at all. And if you're not engaging in things for selfish motives, because selfishness, man, that just takes you down a spiral of misery ultimately. Again, selfishness, I want it for me. It's all about me. It's all about my little self. Well, who is this me? Ultimately, this me is a set of ideas. You ask someone like, who am I? Oh, you say, who are you? Tell me a little bit about you. We start babbling off a whole bunch of words, a bunch of concepts about who we are. But like, no, there's something beyond that. There's a presence that we all have that's here. And if we can get beyond any idea of an I that's constrained to words, which are signifiers for something in the world, then we have freedom. We're free from that. We're not constrained. We're not confined by an idea of ourselves. So when you really think about this stuff, it really makes sense. Renouncing the fruits of your action, that's a much, you don't have expectations. You accept life as it is. When things are horrible in the world, that doesn't mean you don't do anything about it. That's not what it's saying. It's not saying just be apathetic and careless in the world. I mean, this is done within the context of ethics and being a virtuous person. So the prominent yogas in the Gita, oh, that's a mistake. That should be a line over that A. I thought I fixed that. Oh well. Karma yoga, the yoga of action, free from selfish desire, non-attachment to the fruits. That's what karma yoga is. And even beyond that, you're offering your actions to the divine. In this text, to talk about it as Krishna, you don't have to see it as Krishna. If you have a different religious context, you offer that to the divine. For me personally, it's the divine that we are an expression of. I am an expression of divine. You are as well. If I offer all that I am, all of my actions to that which is higher than my individualized, conceptualized self. Think about how liberating and freeing that is. Again, when you're acting also without selfish desire, that's freedom. Jnana yoga is the yoga of knowledge, knowledge of the ultimate reality. Knowledge, not just intellectual knowledge, but a felt sense of knowledge and knowing that there's something beyond my ideas of myself. I am not just Broderick. Broderick has a localized history within the world, but there's something to Broderick that extends beyond. And if I have knowledge of that, I have a knowledge of knowing of that, which this presence that I have inside of me, this presence that I experience, that presence is the same presence that you experience, ultimately. And that presence pervades everything in the universe. Everything in the universe is an expression of it. You can think about it in purely materialistic terms. Everyone say, okay, the universe. We are an expression of the universe. We're not outside the universe looking at it. We are an expression of it. And to know that, that transforms everything in our lives. It could. How do I treat another person? How do I act? How do I behave in the world? You don't engage in malevolent behavior if you know that you're hurting yourself. When you're engaging in malevolent behavior, or aberrant behavior, or just being mean in general. Being mean to another person is being mean to yourself. Dominating another person, you're dominating yourself. So when you have this knowledge, this awareness, you're like, no, that doesn't make any kind of sense to me to engage in that kind of behavior. It can't just be intellectual. You have to feel it in your very being when you have that kind of knowledge. So that's what we mean by knowledge in Jnana yoga. And there's ways to practice that. Bhakti yoga. Well, I'm going to skip Bhakti for now because Karma, Jnana, and Bhakti are the primary yogas that are mentioned here. Let's just go here for a minute, and then I'll come back to Bhakti at the end. Buddhi yoga. It's not Buddhi yoga. Please don't say that. It's Buddhi. Buddhi yoga is the yoga of discernment, discrimination, cultivating the intellect. You have to have the intellectual capacity or develop your intellectual capacity to see the real from the unreal. I have to see that there's something beyond Broderick. Using my intellect, my discriminatory capacity, my capacity to make a comparative analysis, to see that that which is present in me is not limited to the ideas about who I am. That's why discernment is important. And just basic common sense about discernment. How do I act in the world? Again, I'm not going to be hateful towards my brother Kamal because it doesn't make any sense. Not just because he's an African American, we have some shared thing in the world. That's true. But also, Kamal is another expression of the divine, which I am an expression of as well. And so when I use my discrimination, my intellect, to reason that out, I'm like, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense for us to treat each other with dignity and respect. So that's what Buddhi yoga is. Buddhi yoga is this yoga of discernment, of discrimination. I think I almost said Buddhi anyway, and I said, don't say it, didn't I?
Yeah, you did.
I totally did. I can't talk today at all anyway. My words are not flowing. I swear.
That's the only issue here in the States, man. That's that word. Don't worry, keep that.
I know, right?
That's a language hang up for English. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I got you.
My 14-year-old was here. She'd be cracking up, man. But don't worry about it.
I know. Well, a lot of people do it anyway. Even in academia, I'm like, oh, don't say that. Oh well.
Just the English.
Yeah.
I appreciate
yoga.
I appreciate what you're saying about the intellect too, because it defines the intellect as not just like this like cerebral dissection of, minutia, but more, to me, it's like the heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you engage in an intellectual. You don't just intellectualize just for the sake of it. In the Western philosophical canon and tradition, I mean, and there's a lot of focus on just intellectualize for the sake of it, like analytic philosophy. Okay, cool, that serves a purpose to an extent, but what are you doing it for? Within the Indian context, it's all about liberation. The various philosophical traditions, they philosophize like, how do we find freedom? How do we find liberation from suffering? And so you engage in intellectual inquiry to try to make sense of the world, make sense of yourself, so you can be a loving person, so you can be a better person. I use the word love is the center of what it is I do. But that's my central value, and I speak to this in terms of love. All right, dhyana yoga, the yoga of meditation, basically focusing on something, being absorbed in the yoga. So when you're engaged in karma yoga, the yoga of action, when you're acting in the world, and it's not selflessly, without attachment to the fruit, and you can really be mindful, really be there, present. Like Thich Nhat Hanh really speaks to this idea, everything is meditation, everything is practice, everything is mindfulness, really being present. When you're absorbed in yoga, then the passions, the emotions, the ideas about how the world's supposed to be versus what it is right now, there's a certain level of freedom. The contraction falls off. You're much more relaxed. And so meditation is so important as a result of that. Be it a sitting meditation or find some form of mindfulness practice, but sitting meditation is really crucial because you're training the mind how to be present with itself, be present in the moment, and how to accept reality as it is in the moment. That doesn't mean you agree with it. Please don't confuse me. You accept that this shit is crazy when something is crazy. And you're like, okay, how do I use my intellect to transform it? How do I use my mind to figure out a way skillfully to transform, to act in the world that expresses the divine, that allow the divine to express itself through me? So you combine all of these. This stuff makes practical sense when you think about it. And then bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga is central throughout the whole Gita. The yoga of devotion, unfailing love for the divine. In this sense, it's Krishna, but it doesn't have to be Krishna. But you have a profound sense of love and devotion to the divine, which we all are an expression of. And we can have this devotion to something deep inside of ourselves. That has nothing to do with Broderick. Well, in the sense of, well, it doesn't. It actually doesn't. It doesn't have anything to do with Broderick, but it's the means by which Broderick exists. And so when I am devoted to that any idea of Broderick, all of my failings, all of my issues that I have, that through my life of conditioning, all of my shadow that I haven't quite worked through yet, if I'm devoted to something that transcends that, I'm going to keep working through that. I'm going to keep unraveling the onion that's preventing me from expressing love in the world. And this is the best path according to Krishna, the highest yoga, according to Krishna. But if you think about it, when you're engaged in devotion, even if it is a deity, your Ishta Devata in the Indian tradition. So you're like, hey, if you're worshiping the supreme being, if it's Kali, if it's Durga, or whatever tradition within the Indian tradition, even outside of Indian tradition, they're like, okay, then if Jehovah works for you, go for it. Whatever works for you, Jesus, whoever, whatever works for you, you devote yourself fully to it. If that is an expression of the overall divine in the world, that is the best type. But think of when you're doing that, you have ritual, you have various practices, you constantly focus on that. You know, say, like in a sense, Krishna, you're constantly saying Krishna's name, you're reading stories about Krishna, or if it's Jesus in the Bible, you're constantly reading the Bible, you read scripture every day, you're constantly devoted to it. That can be because with that devotion, with that cultivation of love, you are becoming a loving person because you're constantly engaged in love and loving action towards the divine. You can think about that. That's a lot easier than sitting and meditating for some people and focusing the mind, coming back to the object of your meditation. Or jnana yoga. Jnana yoga is not easier. That's a challenge, and it can be scary for some people. I've seen someone have a psychotic break, just constantly listening to like this ideas of no self. I'm like, no, you gotta wait, establish a stable self first before you start talking about no self. And I see a lot of spiritual teachers talking about this. I'm like, that can be a little dangerous. But that's very difficult Karma yoga is a practice. All of these are practices. It's not about getting it perfect. Karma yoga is very difficult as well. To behave without selfish desire, to act in the world selflessly, to truly do that, to act in the world not attached to the fruits. Try it. I mean, really sit there like, I'm going to really do this and see how difficult that is. That doesn't mean you keep working on it. It's just that recognizing, okay, these are difficult. So what you want to do, you want to combine all of these things. You want to engage in all of them. Do the best that you can. My issue with bhakti yoga, and what can happen, and you see this happen with religious fanaticism, is that people lose sight on that what they're devoting to is the divine, and not merely the form that the divine takes. And so if you're a Krishna bhakti, and you can, this mostly happens in the Abrahamic tradition. Like, this is the only God and no other God, and then I'll kill everybody else for not believing in my God, to justify all kinds of evil behavior, and for the sake of your devotion to your God. You've lost sight. That's not yoga. That can be just devotion to some God, but it's not yoga. Because in yoga, you're not merging with the divine and recognize that the divine is an expression of everything. Even if you look at the divine as just the creator of everything, if God created everything, why would you be harmful or hateful to another person? And so what can happen in devotional practice, people can lose sight on the goal and get caught up with the vehicle for that goal. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. You can think about a lot of the religious wars in the world. A lot of it is associated with that. So in case I forgot some things in this presentation, some core themes, I just want to just look at, I put this up here more for me to make sure that I covered most of this stuff. Attachment keeps one in the cycle of rebirth. Think about it. When you're clinging onto something, you're trying to hold on to something. And by the way, repulsion is another way of clinging on to something. You're clinging on to one thing, so you want to repel that thing. So you're clinging on to A, so you want to repel B. Or you just want to hold on to A. When you're trying to hold on to something, I mean, how are you going to be free from the cycle of rebirth? You can think about rebirth as not just the soul being reborn into the world again, but every moment of your experience. How am I allowing the thoughts in my mind, past thoughts, to continuously rebirth themselves and create more madness in my life? How do I transcend that? Reason why those thoughts keep coming up, I'm attached to them. Some part of my psyche is clinging to those thoughts, but I can transcend those through the practice of yoga. So knowledge, liberation from the cycle of rebirth, free from attachment, over and over and over again. The Gita is very repetitive about this. Act without attachment, act without attachment, act without selflessly, act without motivation to the fruits, giving up selfish motives constantly throughout the text. The individual soul versus the universal soul. In the Vedanta philosophy, particularly non-dual Vedanta philosophy, Advaita Vedanta philosophy, the Atman merges with the Atman is the Brahman. So the soul, that presence in me, it is the universal reality. Now, in more devotional traditions, like Krishna is an expression of the universal reality, and with personality. So you have the personal, which is Krishna, ultimate reality, and then you have the impersonal reality, Brahman. So the impersonal ultimate reality is identified as Brahman, and the personal reality can be Shiva, can be Krishna, Vishnu, Ram, Ganesha, whatever deity one worships. And then the Bhakti tradition of Hinduism pretty much is centered around the personified version of the ultimate reality. So the various deities within Hinduism are manifestations of the personified version of ultimate reality. So Dharma, act according to one's own nature. You do your thing. It's better to do one's own Dharma than someone else's. We suffer. We know this. When we're going against our heart, we're going against our nature, we suffer. We have dissatisfaction in life. Most people haven't realized what their nature is because we're crammed through an educational system. We're told that if you do this job, you'll make a whole lot of money, and then you do that to make a lot of money, going against your soul, going against your nature, going against your Dharma. So that's disharmony within your own self. And also, you're not able to fully bring your gifts and talents to the world when you're going against your Dharma, your own nature. Again, discernment, another thing consistently throughout the text. You are not your small self, your ego. You're beyond that. Relinquishing selfish desires, again, selfish desires they consider as the enemy of the world, impossible to satisfy, blocks knowledge when we're engaged in selfish desire. Because when we're desiring something and it doesn't come to good and it doesn't happen the way we want it to be, that produces anger, and then it's a vicious cycle. Anger produces all kinds of other stuff in the world. And an angry person can ultimately engage in all types of aberrant activity or malevolent behavior. Self-restraint, control of the senses, basically not being controlled or dominated by your senses. Just because something feels good don't mean you need to do it. You know, if you have a weight problem, you know, yes, it tastes good, but you don't want to go and eat cakes all day long, because that's going to help you produce and gain more weight. I mean, the stuff is, when you really think about it, you're like, oh, I guess that makes sense. Because when you have excessive weight, then that can lead to all kinds of health problems, as an example. Free from the passions. Again, if we're just seeking pleasure through our senses and we're dominated by our emotions, then we're not free. Our emotions dominate and control us. I have no control over my anger. I get depressed. I can't even function in the world because I am depressed, and I define myself. I am my depression. Like, no, we have to transcend that. Relinquish possessiveness. You know, I got to cling. It's just another sign of clinging, attachment, holding on to something, not being free, not being in the flow of life. That's why I like Taoism. It really talks a lot about the flow, being in the flow of life. Free from envy. Devoted to the welfare of all beings, really important part of all of this. Like, why would you do all this yoga stuff? You can do it for your own selfish reasons, be a little monk in the cave and just focus on that. Even the monk in the cave is doing it for the welfare of all beings. If we're all interconnected, we're all an expression of the divine, we're all a part of the one web. What each one of us are doing, even when we're thinking we're doing it in isolation, we're not. We're having an impact, an influence on the whole. So the monk in the cave is actually contributing if they're really genuinely devoted to the realization of the ultimate reality. That has an impact, an influence on the entire web, the entire net. So living virtuously, being a good person, essentially, cultivating excellence and character. In order for you to live virtuously, you need to develop the characteristics that are conducive to being a good person. There's a couple of chapters in the Gita where just pretty much Krishna outlines what a good person looks like, basically. What does the yogi look like? What are the characteristics of the yogi? And in the process of doing all this, you need to have faith. Not necessarily faith in Krishna, but you need to have faith that what you're doing is going to work, that it is working in your life. You know, we all engage in faith. People usually use the word faith in terms of religion, but we all engage in faith. A hardcore atheist has faith in his atheism. You know, like, no, I have faith in science. I really do. I have faith that we can figure out everything. Everything is just purely materialistic. And I don't believe in there's no such thing as a transcendent God. Well, that's just a faithful belief. And with conviction, write books about it, try to humiliate people who are engaged in religious traditions. But, you know, and talking about how faith is messed up, I'm like, well, you actually engage in faith yourself. Regular practice. My teacher, Babaji, will always say, people ask him, what do you do, Babaji? How do you become a better person? How do you become a better yogi? Regular practice. What happens after you have enlightenment? Regular practice. So there's no blowout enlightenment and like, oh, I got it all figured out. Now I can be a shithead for the rest of my life. No. Practice. We have to keep practicing. Why? Let's think about this. We are all an accumulation of generation of ideas. We've been conditioned, not only in our lifetime, but our ancestors conditioned us. And we have not reached the epitome of human evolution. We are not all an we are an expression of the divine, but we don't show it. It's not showing up in the world the way that it could be. In order for that to happen, we have to continuously practice and engage in these activities to unravel more and more of our divine nature. And that's going to allow us to love in the world. So when we're, as a yogi, the more we engage in these practices, the more we work through our dramas, work through our inner process, the more we can bring that out into the outer world. And that's going to close up with, I love this, the supreme secret of yoga in the Bhagavad Gita in the 18th chapter. These two verses pretty much sums it up. Now, again, this is in terms of Krishna, but let's think about it beyond that. And I'll say that in just a moment. The greatest secret of all, so chapter 18, verse 64, the greatest secret of all, once more please hear, it is my supreme message. You are so much loved by me. You are so much loved by me. The divine loves us. What does that mean by love? The divine reaches out, longs to connect with us. And the reason why this idea is that it's not connected to us because we have all of this stuff blocking it, all these ideas blocking it. Thereupon, I shall continue declaring this message for you, which I have set forth into motion. Be mindful of me with love offered to me, sacrificing for me, act out of reverence for me. Truly, you shall come to me. This I promise you, for you are dearly loved by me. When we act in the world with love, if the world is an expression of the divine is longing for us to love it. When we act in the world from our hearts with love, then love, we will receive love. Love comes back to us. We can find freedom through love. That's the ultimate secret, the ultimate yoga, at least as it's suggested in the Bhagavad Gita. All the other yogas, all the various practices and ideas support the notion of being a loving person. Now, this is the Graham Schwag's translation. You'll read this in different, I encourage, read different translations. See how other people put this into words, different sects. I love Advaita Vedanta. I'm all into Vedanta. And I like the way they put things, but I also can appreciate those who come out of the Bhakti tradition. Because when we love allows us to build bridges and to connect with something much, much greater than ourselves. You want to know who God is? It's in the space between two people. It's beyond ourselves. And when we really, really, truly love, we can really feel the presence of the divine. And I think that's a big part of this message. And if we engage in all these other activities, working on ourselves, developing our character, engaging in our intellect, cultivating emotional intelligence, learning how to be self-aware, practicing self-awareness, reflecting, looking at our minds and see how we're acting crazy, where we're crazy and where we're not. And then you're able to make an informed, intelligent decisions on how we want to transform our narrative and how we want to transform how we act and behave in the world. And the notion here in the Gita, be a loving person. Love the world, love the divine, and the divine will love you back. I think that's it. You see my little logo here? People picked at me when I first started doing it because my whole thing is about being a loving person. How do you cultivate your capacity to be a loving person? And so when I'm reading the Gita, particularly this Graham Schwag's version, and it's talking about the ultimate aim here is to be a loving person, I'm with you, man. I'm totally with you. All right, I'm going to be quiet. I've said enough. Any questions? I'm going to exit out of this. Let me see, can I do this?
You can just end
the
sharing option.
Yeah, I was trying to pull that up. Let me see.
You can go to the bottom of your screen.
All right, there it is.
If you go down broad to share screen, there you go. You got it. Wow. So
try to get all that out.
Take a break, bro. Take a break, brother. Amazing. First off, phenomenal presentation. Because for me to make like a scripture that's so dense and so full, to make it so accessible and approachable and understandable and relatable isn't an easy task. So I really deeply appreciate your presentation, your words. So in terms of question, we have a few people who are teachers in the conversation here. I mean, quite honestly, I feel like you really answered my question, but I want to put it forward anyway. Would be on behalf of myself and us, because I know that, you know, to a large extent, when people come into a yoga class these days, they're coming into an asana class. So with everything you shared in mind, like, how do you recommend kind of making some of this information accessible in a class that a lot of people hear, you know, coming from kind of a movement-based yoga practice? How do you recommend that we incorporate some of these ideas into a contemporary yoga class space?
So I think the Hatha Yoga tradition is kind of what we're doing kind of comes out of the Hatha Yoga tradition. It's not completely the Hatha Yoga tradition. It's a lot more complicated than that. But when we are engaging in physical exercise, the way I teach my classes, I'm always saying, like, let's think about this practically. When you're coming to asana practice, you want to take care of your form. If my form is an expression of the divine, now people might not like the word divine, I get that, but you can still word it in this way. If I enhance my physical functioning, I'm going to enhance my capacity to fully express myself in the world. So I want to develop various capacities that I have. My intellectual capacity, I want to develop all these things and how I present myself into the world. I think about yoga asana as a pathway of cultivating somatic intelligence. And when I'm cultivating somatic intelligence, I am allowing the life force energy to flow through my body. My mind-body connection has been refined. And so when my mind-body connection has been refined, the energies are flowing through, I feel healthy and vibrant, then I'm much more present and engaged with the world. I'm minimizing stress, unnecessary stress and tension. Stress and tension holds us, restrains us from fully expressing ourselves in the world. Because we all are an expression of that divine. How do we maximize our capacity to express that in the world? Now, you can do physical exercise and take care of your physical form and have no care for any other human being. And I think that in my yoga, I'm always stressing, what are we doing? What is our intention in yoga? It's to be a good person or to be liberated from suffering. We suffer when our physical form is not well. If I'm not feeling well in my physical body, I'm increasing the likelihood of being an asshole. You know, how many people do you know they're generally an asshole just because they have a bad stomach ache or something. I don't know, that's a silly example, but you know, they've been eating beef all day long and they're you know, and I think they're falling apart. You know, I'm not saying you shouldn't eat beef, but you know, but it's just that if that's all you're doing, if that's all you're doing, then you're gonna suffer. Your physical body, you're not gonna be able to function right. Your mind is not gonna be clear. And so you want a clear mind, you got to have a well-functioning body. You know, the mind is not just your brain. The mind is infused in your whole form. And when you're taking care of the form, when it's functioning efficiently and effectively, then you can really bring yourself to the world, your divine self to the world. So that's where I talk about it. You know, I'm constantly saying yoga is liberation from suffering, liberation from suffering. How do you suffer? You suffer, the vehicle of your experience is the body. And if you're not taking care of your body, you know, you can hear all these people, this is why I don't buy it. You know, they talk about awakening. All they talk about is awakening, awakening, awakening. I'm like, what do you mean by that? Anybody can have a spiritual experience. But how does that show up in your actions? how does it show up in act? How do we act in the world? Through our body. And if the body is an expression of the divine, no matter what your religious tradition is, why would you not take care of it? It's an insult to the divine when you don't take care of our body. To me, I have a potty mouth, so I'm gonna say it. It's just that when we don't take care of our bodies, it's just like saying, "Fuck you, God. I'm not gonna take care of myself. I have this body. I don't care nothing about it. It's not precious. And it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm just here to eat my cheese doodles or whatever they have in Europe or whatever." And it's like, no, it's more than that. This thing is precious, man. Yeah. This is beautiful. And how do we scope it? I look at a yoga teacher as an artist, or yoga practitioner as an artist. I am cultivating my mind, body, soul to be an expression of beauty and goodness in the world, an expression of the divine.
That's right.
For me, you can articulate that some form. That's how I do it, at any rate.
That's right. Thank you, brother. Someone else have something for Broderick? I know y'all have thoughts.
Just a chat in there. I don't know. Is there something in the chat?
Oh, good point.
Oh, Brian. Oh yeah, I'll send a copy of my PowerPoint for sure.
Just wanted to, the reason I asked is that your presentation is so beautiful.
Oh,
and so,
thank you.
And so rich. And one of the things that helped me to clarify is, I've really over the years I see myself as a person who doesn't have a really firm belief in an exterior God. I believe in God. I believe there's higher forces, but one of the things that your presentation helped me to understand is, and this is not insignificant, is what I actually mean by God. It's not the Cartesian notion of I think, therefore I am. And it's not really the yogic notion as such. It's some combination of all of that comes down to relationships. It's more like the Ubuntu notion.
Yes.
I am because we are. And I hadn't thought of that as a godly belief before your presentation, frankly. But you asked what are you devoted to? That's what I'm devoted to. Somehow, it begins with the inner synergy, within me, then extending that out into the world and to figure out how I can help to create a more interconnected a world. So this has been really tremendously useful for me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's good to hear that because I feel like I'm stumbling all over the place. It's so much.
Oh, you were very clear.
Thank you.
But I'll tell you another thing. You have got me. Salim is a yoga teacher, and I sort of have been on the fringe. But your emphasis on practice and the regularity and discipline lands on me. So I'm going to get into this more.
Oh, awesome. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And remembering too, I don't know what kind of asana practice you do, your physical practice. I mean, when you get into the history of this, the stuff that we're doing now, a lot of it came from, designed for little boys. But, you think about your asana, your physical practice is to enhance the well-being of the physical body. You don't need to be hopping back and doing a version of this Ashtanga yoga. You don't need to do that. You don't need to stretch the body, twist the body, get the energy flowing through, stretch the hamstrings. You do all this to put tension on the bones so that the body can function well. That's all it is. You can have a quote unquote gentle practice, as long as the practice is helping the physical functioning of the body. That's what's important. And that's just the asana practice. Your practice can be, now one of my practices now, I love Rabindranath Tagore. When I finally got his book again, he's an Indian poet. It's just awesome. And I just read a poem. After I do my meditation, I say, okay, let me go and read a poem. And I read it several times. That's my practice. I play guitar every night. That's my practice. Because it does something. Music allows me to connect with something. Music is God. Those of you who play music, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And when you connect with that, that can be a part of your practice, one part of your practice. So for me, the practice is all day. It's just thinking about it. Like, okay, what is my yoga? My yoga practice, my idea behind practicing yoga is so I can make connection with the divine, or I can be a loving person, or I can be a virtuous person. These ideas, and I'm going to practice doing that, and knowing that that's my practice, that's my dedication, that's my commitment. Breathing exercise is really important too. Pranayama is amazing.
We have
any other questions or thoughts?
We have something in the chat, Brad, from Betsy.
Okay. Can I read this? I'll read it out loud. So
yeah.
This may
you
be.
can read it.
Okay. This may be oversimplistic, but can you summarize how you make peace with the Abrahamic tradition, which is my experience seems to be very excluding? You either believe in this, or you will go to hell and burn forever. For some reason, I disagree with this, yet I hold on to the fear that I am not doing it right, and I may suffer that fate. I want to let go of the Abrahamic threats, but have been having difficulty with that in my deepest heart. Very interesting. So that's a big part of my path. I'll put it this way. There are Christian ideals out there, in particular in the contemporary, and I can shoot you some ideas, some people. Richard Rohr comes to mind. So if you go look up Richard Rohr, he's really awesome.
Do you know how to spell the last name, Brad? So
R-O-H-R.
Great, got it.
He's a Franciscan monk. So listen what he has to say about all this. And there's other Christian theologians, John Cobb. There's a podcast that I've been listening to, the Homebrew Christianity. So for you Christians out there, Homebrew Christianity is the podcast. It's interesting. Trip Fuller is the guy that's on there. Just something to listen to, and just to get a different progressive perspective on Christianity. And these are theologians. But a lot of the stuff that's out there in the Abrahamic tradition is very dogmatic and fundamentalistic. You're going to burn in hell forever if you don't believe in this. Not all of those traditions are, not all within the Christian tradition adhere to that notion. And there's a strong history of how that came into being. But I think the Christian tradition, there are those Christian scholars out there now who are trying to think about other traditions. What's it? It's this guy. I can't think. I had to send it to you all later, and then some other names that I can point to that can help you with that. But how do you reconcile that? I think that a lot of it is very excluding, and there's a reason why within that whole Abrahamic tradition of why it can be so exclusive. But I think we're coming into a modern age where people are starting to recognize how to be inclusive or pluralist. How do we be pluralistic? Not saying that all traditions are the same, because they're not the same. But how do we be pluralistic in the terms of everybody got a little bit of the truth? And then, so how do we find a little bit of the truth in everybody and integrate those into our lives? And when we get stuck with what version of Christianity are you believing? Are you believing the Christianity after the Council of Nicaea? What about the old Desert Fathers? One of my mentors, another one is Matthew Fox. He's my mentor, and he's written a whole lot of books, 30 so books about various expressions of Christianity. But he really goes back into the whole Desert Fathers and Mothers, the original Christianity, before it became what we see today, particularly after the Romans pretty much took it over. And how it's integrated with Greek philosophy and things of that nature, which is all that can be fine. Everything evolves, everything continuously evolves. But the key these days, with the easy access that we have, how do we broaden our horizons and overcome some of this, the limited beliefs? But I'm gonna tell you something, it took me 10 years I grew up hardcore Southern Baptist in South Carolina, and trust me, I was all into it. Big time. I grew up, old poor black folk in the South. Ain't nothing like that singing, nothing. And when the idea of catching the Holy Ghost, I don't know how you can go into a church like that and don't catch the Holy Ghost. It's not like that anymore. They've modernized. So back then, you can feel that power that when people would sing. Was that Jesus, or was that something very African-like? And so you have to, it begs the question, what was that? Was that because of Jesus? Was I being brought into a yogic state, a flow state through that music because of Jesus or because of something else? Now, Jesus was the language medium by which it was spoken, but there was something magical happening there through that sound, that longing for freedom and liberation that you experience, and the music. And so being able to distinguish, just because I had spiritual experiences, and then I was told on top of it, so when you go into this trance-like state, it's like a hypnotic state, you're very susceptible. And when you're very susceptible, someone telling you you're going to burn in hell if you don't believe in this, 10 years of like letting go of the Christian thing, but finally like, I don't think I'm going to burn in hell now. But it took 10 years of hardcore studying and exploring all kinds of different thoughts, because it was so ingrained in me that I was going to burn in hell forever. And then when I sit back and think about it, I'm like, wow, that is crazy. You talk about cult or indoctrination, that is some craziness. And it doesn't take away the value that I see in Christianity. There's still a lot of practices and ideas within the Christian tradition, even the fundamentalist Christians. There's some magic that's going on there. But how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? I think the chaff or whatever. And like, how do we do that? You got to be able to say, all right, that's crazy, but this is beautiful. And it's okay to throw out the craziness and keep the beautiful. I still sing those old gospel songs. There's a song that I love to sing. It's so beautiful. I almost cry every time I sing it. Maybe I'll sing it at the end of this, just a little bit. But it's so beautiful. And then you wonder, like, does that have anything to do with Christianity? Especially the song, it's all about it's all about being free from bondage. And I sing it sometimes at the end of my yoga classes. Sleep Brothers, I don't know if you've heard me sing it before, but because it's so poignant to the idea of what yoga is all about. Yeah, it came out of a Southern Baptist Christian tradition where people can barely read and write.
Yeah.
So I hope that's, you're
not done, bro. Go ahead, keep talking, bro.
So here's another one. Please share with us about your journey and practice of daily meditation. Oh, Lord. Well, I guess I talked a little bit about my journey, but oh man, when I was in graduate school, I came across, that's when I started some asana yoga when I was at Georgia Tech. So I'm gonna keep this very brief, everyone. But during that time, I started questioning everything. I think I started getting into the whole Rastafarian thing big time. I always tell people Bob Marley changed my life. I had never heard anything like that. Now I grew up singing, listening to gospel music and R&B big time. I wasn't into the hip hop stuff, but R&B and gospel music. But when I heard Bob, I was like, wow, he's actually saying something about freedom, about African pride, about Black pride. That was the beginning of, I feel like, my journey. And I mean, it started in undergrad, and I was just like, wow, that's deep, that's profound. Went to graduate school, and I kept reading about the African American experience, and a lot of people were talking about things, about monotheism, where did it come from, what was that, African origins of civilization kind of shook me up, So reading all this stuff, and I started to be interested in, I didn't know, I became a very angry Black man at the same time. I had to come to a point like, you know what, I didn't know all of this. I didn't know my history. But I'm saying all this, that was the beginning of me trying to unravel the onion, trying to make sense of who I was, to try to learn how to love myself. This is all part of a yoga practice to me. When I learning how, what does it mean to be a Black man in the world? And heavily influenced by Rastafarianism and reading books on Rastafarianism kind of got me, and hanging out with Rastafarians, shook me up a whole lot. It's kind of me thinking about things in a very, very different way. Even though I was pulling away from Christianity, this was still linked to it with the whole Abrahamic tradition, but it was in a way that was, just beautiful in the music, just in a very, very beautiful way. Now it has its dogma and stuff like that, and certain aspects of it for sure. But there's a lot of beauty in that tradition that kind of helped me wake up. But through that, I kept reading and studying, and started changing my diet and lifestyle. And of course, Rastafarian helped me, learn, move towards vegetarianism. But in the process, I'm reading, and this is when I really started reading. Actually, I didn't start reading until I was in graduate school. But I was reading voraciously about the African American experience and how to better myself as a person. A lot of people were suggesting that you need to change your lifestyle in general. And in the process of doing that, kept reading, kept studying, got interested in natural medicine, went to this natural medicine school in Seattle, Washington. And through there, really kept changing, kept studying and reading, got into Buddhism, started getting into more nature cure stuff, of course, from there. But started to understand like the root of suffering is in the mind, and understanding that, I was not liberated because I was ignorant of myself, and kept growing and kept learning like, it's not just that I'm a proud African American or a proud man of African descent, but I am an expression of the divine over time. It took time to really come to that realization, and just kept reading and studying and exploring, meditation retreat. After I left Bastille, I did a lot of stuff there. I'm keeping this really short. A lot of exploration. And then I said, I'm on a sabbatical. I had been in school all my life. I was intensely engaged in academic pursuits, along with studying and reading outside of that stuff, the extracurricular reading and studying, and experimentation. And then I went on sabbatical, my kind of sabbatical, which it wasn't all about relaxing, training capoeira and studying yoga. And I started living at yoga centers and just kept studying and developing my practice. And now, it's what I do. I wake up in the morning and I prepare myself to a sitting meditation. My meditation involves chanting. It involves breathing exercises, a lot of pranayama, core of my practice. Various meditation techniques, and an asana practice. I incorporate all kinds of stuff in there. Positive affirmations. I pull it all in and say whatever I can do to be a better person. And so like my morning is gone. I've kind of cut it short, but it used to be 3 to 4 hours where that's my morning is dedicated to all that practice. And then in the afternoons, that's all I do actually. I study and read and try to be a better person and try to teach others or share with others how to be a better person. So I've made it my life, my life work. And I love music. Music is a part of practice. I really encourage, if you don't play music, even if you don't have to be a superstar musician, but it can really do something for you in a magical way. To be honest, I really think a lot of this stuff comes out of music. Comes out of people playing music, going into a hypnotic trance through music. And also intoxication on some various substances. I don't know why people are opposed to that. But you read in the Vedic tradition, they were drinking soma a lot and getting high. And so it was probably like something like ayahuasca. I was looking at this other thing. Marijuana has been a major substance that humans have been using to support getting into certain states of consciousness and states of mind. So yeah, I think that about sums up. And my practice again, I can talk about details of it, but it's a lot of pranayama though. Lots. Really quickly, Matthew Fox, really he's awesome guy. From Nairobi, thank you so much, amazing president. Okay, thank you. I believe Orthodoxy Christianity takes a softer approach than Christian. Yes. Who's that? Lisa?
That's
yes.
Lisa.
Orthodox Christianity.
Yeah, go ahead, bro.
Yeah, Orthodox Church is yes. So look into the Franciscans, Orthodox, especially the Greek Orthodox, or the Orthodox outside of some of the Roman Catholic. But even the Roman Catholics not near the Protestant Revolution. It had its positives, but boy, I mean, that's where a lot of the fundamentalism comes out after the Protestant Revolution. But I hope this is useful because, again, I don't know. I feel like it's so much to it that can be unpacked from the Bhagavad Gita. I really encourage it. Hopefully, I inspired you to kind of play with it. Start reading it, pick it up, and I'm not saying you should agree with everything in it. I mean, the hardcore notion of devoting to some being outside of myself or some form, that doesn't resonate with me. But just because that one thing doesn't resonate with me, doesn't mean I'm not going to, get a lot of other stuff out of it. Yeah. Or those of you who are Christian and you still feel a connection to that, I mean, Richard Warren has a website, man. You can go to YouTube, listen to his lectures. But his website, his sermons, he's awesome. And there's other characters out there too. William Barber is his African-American minister in North Carolina, and he's a political activist, but really intelligent. If you want to hear somebody preaching and like that Martin Luther King, really get your soul stirred all up, go listen to William Barber. That'll get you all riled all up.
Can you spell the last name for William Barber, you said, Brad?
Yeah, Barber.
Okay.
Yeah, he's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to keep. You have time, Brad, or you need to move forward with your day?
No, I got time. I have a couple of the class in 3 hours, but other than that.
Okay. So
I do have to get off. I've got somebody coming over.
Thanks for joining, Dad.
I want to say goodbye to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good to see you. And I'll send you the slides.
Great.
I'll send it
Appreciate
to
that very much.
Too. Yeah.
This is wonderful. Thank you.
I can get anything to Dad. I can connect you guys directly. We're gonna. I'm gonna end the recording here. We're gonna wrap up that piece, but we can, by all means, keep reasoning because this is what it's for. So for those that need to go, I know it's a big thank you from everyone who's here, Broderick. Like amazing information. You're such a beautiful soul, bro. My brother. So glad to have you in this space, this forum. We're gonna keep building on this. We're gonna do more. I feel like there needs to be a part 2. Kind of feel like everyone probably feels that. So we're gonna wrap up. Here, just in case anyone needs to transition to whatever's next in your day and your life. Thank you, and the recording here, and we can keep talking, online, not offline.
Salim, can I mention briefly, like next week's Sangha before we continue? Go
ahead.
So next week, next Sunday, Audrey Peterman, who you see on the screen, he's going to be tuning in and leading the Sangha presentation from Jamaica. That's where she's from. She's an author, activist, connecting all people to public and natural lands. And she's been a mentor of mine since I was 21. We've done a lot of work together. So just want to briefly mention a little bit of that. We'll post it up on the site soon.
And this presentation as well will be posted on the site in case anyone wants to share. In case anyone wants to share this Sangha with other people who'd be interested. All right. Thank you guys so much. We'll keep talking, but we'll end the recording here.